The coffee was still warm when I found the proof. Sitting on my kitchen counter at 5 in the morning, a thermos my son had left before dawn. The same blend he swore was his mother's recipe, but my hands were still shaking from the dream. Corinne had grabbed my face, her dead fingers burning against my skin, and screamed one sentence that turned my blood into ice water. "Don't drink it, Luther. He's killing you." Hello, everyone. Welcome to this story. Before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, and tell me, would you trust a warning from a dream like that? Do not forget to like and subscribe. Please note, this is a fictional story, crafted for experience and meaningful insight. Any similarities to real events are purely coincidental. I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to 4:47 in the morning, when the boundary between the living and the dead dissolved in my bedroom, like sugar in hot water. I woke up clawing at my own throat. The sheets were soaked through, twisted around my legs like restraints, and my heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my teeth. The bedroom was dark except for the red glow of the clock, and the air tasted of old radiator dust and something impossible. Lavender. Corinne's lavender. My wife had been dead for 14 months. I had washed her scent out of the pillowcases myself, packed away her bottles, her sachets, everything. There was no lavender left in this house. Yet there it was, thick as fresh perfume, concentrated in the kitchen below me, as if she had just walked through it. The dream was not the soft kind you get about people you have lost. This was violent. Corinne was standing behind the counter of our old coffee shop on Hawthorne Street, wearing the green apron with the coffee stain on the left pocket, the one she refused to wash because she called it her first badge of honor. But her face was wrong, tight with a terror I had never seen. Not even in those final weeks when she knew the cancer was winning. She was holding a cup of coffee, and the steam rising from it was black. Not gray. Black. Like smoke from a burning building. Her hands shook so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim and hissed when it hit the counter, eating into the wood like acid. "Luther," she said, and her voice was scraped raw, desperate, nothing like the warm alto I had fallen asleep to for 35 years. "Don't drink what he brings you. It is not my recipe. It was never my recipe." I tried to reach for her, to tell her how empty the house had been, how I still set 2 mugs on the counter every morning before I remembered. But she lunged across the counter and grabbed my face, and her fingers were burning. Actually burning. The pain so real I could feel blisters forming on my jaw. "He is killing you!" she screamed. And the black coffee behind her erupted in a boiling flood. "Check the recipe. Check everything. Open your eyes before he closes them forever." Then she was gone, and I was upright in bed, gasping, pressing my palms against the unmarked skin where her burning grip still lingered like a brand seared into my nerve endings. I am Luther Marsh, 61 years old, 30 years behind a coffee counter, then 5 behind a pharmacy counter when I went back to school after we sold the shop. I can identify a Guatemalan single origin from an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe blindfolded. I spent 5 years as a licensed pharmacist, reading the molecular language of pills and compounds. I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in extraction, temperatures, and chemical structures, and the science of a perfect cup. But Corinne had never been wrong about anything that mattered. Not once. In 35 years. I sat on the edge of the bed listening to rain against the windows of our craftsman house above the Willamette River. Portland always has the sound of water somewhere, dripping off eaves, tapping the glass like fingers asking to be let in. That morning, the rain sounded like a countdown. When I finally stood, my knees protesting the way they always do now, I walked down the narrow staircase, one hand on the banister Corinne had picked out, the wood smooth from decades of our hands traveling the same path. The kitchen was dark. The only light came from the green glow of the coffee maker we had bought together 25 years ago at a secondhand shop on Division Street. She had haggled the owner down $12 and kissed me on the sidewalk, triumphant and beautiful. The lavender was stronger here, concentrated around the back door and the counter as though she had physically walked between them and left a trail. I stood in the dark, heart hammering, and that is when I saw it. A brushed steel thermos sitting beside the coffee maker. It had not been there when I went to bed. I lived alone. The doors were locked. Yet here it was, beaded with condensation. A ghost offering from a son who should not have been anywhere near my house before dawn. Brendan usually came by around 7 with that same thermos, always insisting I drink his version of Corinne's morning blend. It was our routine for 3 months. Ever since he started telling me I looked tired, looked thin, looked like I needed taking care of. It was 4:53 in the morning. He had never come before 7. Not once. I unscrewed the cap. The steam hit my face, and for a moment it smelled right. The caramel sweetness of a medium roast with vanilla, but underneath, buried like a whisper under a shout, there was something sharp, metallic, faintly spicy, like a chemical compound trying very hard not to be noticed. 30 years behind a coffee counter. 5 years reading pill bottles. You do not fool this nose. Corinne always said it was my superpower and my curse, because I could never let a single off note go uninvestigated. I set the thermos down and walked to the drawer beside the refrigerator. I pulled out the thing that mattered most in this kitchen. Her recipe book, a soft leather journal the color of dark roast, filled with her handwriting. Every blend we ever created lived in these pages. I had not opened it since she died, because her handwriting made the grief physical. I opened it now to Morning Blend. Her elegant letters slanted right, leaning into the future. Colombian medium roast, 60%. Ethiopian Sidamo, 30%. A pinch of Saigon cinnamon. Half a vanilla bean. Filtered water at 203 degrees. Then I held the thermos beside the page and inhaled again, slowly, separating each layer the way she taught me, pulling apart the cord to hear each hidden note. There were at least 4 things in this thermos that did not belong in any cup of coffee ever made. 4 compounds hiding under the caramel like rats beneath a beautiful tablecloth. My hand froze on the page, my fingertip resting on the word love she had doodled in the margin beside the recipe. This was not her morning blend, and my son had left it at my door before dawn, like a predator, placing bait at the mouth of a burrow. The sound of a key turning in the back door lock at 7 in the morning should not have made my blood run cold. But I had never given anyone a key to that door. I was still at the kitchen counter. The thermos and recipe book spread before me like evidence. When the metallic scrape of the deadbolt cut through the silence, I grabbed both and shoved them into the cabinet beneath the sink. By the time the door swung open, bringing cold November rain and expensive cologne, I was beside the stove holding a glass of water, wearing the face of a man who had simply woken up early. Brendan came through first. My son was 38, tall with styled hair and a lean jaw that belonged on a magazine cover. But his skin had a grayish tint this morning, like milk left out too long, and his eyes bounced from the counter to the thermos spot to my face, quick and calculating, the way a card player checks his hand. Morning, Dad. Too bright. A full octave above his natural register. We brought breakfast. Behind him, Tessa entered the way she entered every room, as if appraising it for auction. My daughter-in-law was 33. Chestnut hair that never moved out of place, a smile that could charm a loan officer into forgetting the interest rate. She carried a bakery bag and a second thermos identical to the one I had just hidden. Good morning, Luther. That musical, nurturing pitch she always used with me, the one that tightened my skin like a drum. You look like you slept terribly. Have you been taking your medication on schedule? You know how forgetful you have been lately. There it was. The first drop of poison in the conversation. Forgetful. She had been planting that word more and more over the past 2 months, sowing it into every interaction like a gardener tending seeds she intended to harvest later. I watched her move toward my medication cabinet. Her fingers found the weekly pill organizer with a familiarity that stopped my breath. She opened it and began rearranging the compartments with quick, practiced movements. I could not see exactly what she did, but I saw her left hand dip into her coat pocket and come out empty. A sleight of hand, so smooth it could have been nothing. Or everything. Brendan unscrewed the second thermos with a ceremonial flourish that turned my stomach. Steam curled upward, carrying caramel and vanilla, and beneath it, that same metallic whisper from an hour ago. He poured a cup and pushed it toward me. Mom's recipe. Drink it while it is hot. You know it loses the flavor. I picked up the mug. The ceramic was warm, and for one terrible moment, I thought of Corinne's burning fingers gripping my face in the dream. I raised it to my lips, tilting just enough that steam dampened my upper lip. Brendan watched with an intensity that had nothing to do with coffee. By the sink, Tessa had stopped rearranging pills. She was watching too, perfectly still, eyes locked on the mug like a cat tracking a bird. On the windowsill sat a ceramic pot of English ivy, a plant Corinne had propagated from her mother's garden cutting in 1992. It survived 3 decades, 2 renovations, and the death of the woman who planted it. I had been watering it with leftover coffee every morning for years, a habit Corinne started because she swore caffeine made the leaves shinier. I faked a violent cough, turning sharply toward the sink and bending as if the spasm stole my breath. The mug tipped, and I let the dark liquid pour into the ivy pot, the soil drinking it with a soft hiss. By the time I straightened, wiping my mouth, the mug was empty. Brendan relaxed. His shoulders dropped a full inch, tension leaving like steam escaping a valve. Tessa turned back to the pills, her smile returning with a brightness that never reached her eyes. They stayed 20 minutes, filling the kitchen with noise about holiday plans and restaurant reservations. Tessa reminded me twice to take my pills. Brendan refilled the mug from the thermos and left it on the counter, positioned exactly where habit would make me reach for it. Then they left, the back door clicking shut behind them like the cocking of a hammer. I stood motionless until their engine faded down the hill. Then I looked at the ivy. The leaves closest to the soil were curling at the edges, green fading to a sickly yellow that had not been there yesterday. I knelt beside the pot, knees cracking against the floor, and touched a wilting leaf. It came away limp and wet. The life dissolved out of it. I had been pouring Brendan's coffee into this plant for 3 months. The ivy that survived 30 years was dying from the inside, and until this moment I had blamed the season. If it is killing the plant, I whispered, the words tasting like copper, then what has it been doing to me? I walked to the pill organizer Tessa had rearranged and opened the Thursday compartment. 2 blood pressure capsules, 1 cholesterol tablet, and 2 small white pills that were supposed to be metoprolol, the beta blocker, keeping my heart rhythm steady. I held them to the window light. To most people, they would look identical. Same size, same shape, same shade of white. But I spent 5 years behind a pharmacy counter, and my eyes read pills the way my nose reads a roast. These tablets were a fraction too pale, the surface too smooth, the edges missing the micro bevel the manufacturer presses into every genuine tablet. These were not metoprolol. Someone had replaced my heart medication with counterfeits. My heart had been running unprotected for weeks, while something in that coffee worked to shut it down. I placed the pills on the counter, hands shaking with a rage slowly replacing the fear. Then I looked up at the shelf above the stove, where Corinne's photograph had watched over this kitchen for 14 months. Her smile was warm, eternal, frozen in a summer afternoon at Cannon Beach. But something was different. I stepped closer and the breath left my body. Tucked into the frame corner, so small it could pass for a speck of dust, was a tiny glass lens. A camera, angled to capture the counter, the stove, and the chair where I sat every morning to drink my coffee. Someone had turned my dead wife's photograph into a surveillance device, using her face to watch me swallow my own death 1 careful sip at a time. The scratch marks on the back door lock were fresh, jagged lines carved into brass that had been smooth and new just 4 weeks ago. I had changed that deadbolt myself in October, after a string of break-ins on the hill made the evening news. I remembered kneeling on the back porch in the rain, screwdriver in hand, Corinne's voice in my memory reminding me to use the longer screws because the original ones were never enough. The brass had been immaculate when I finished. Now it looked like someone had taken a serrated blade to it, or forced a duplicate key that did not quite fit. Brendan told me he used the old emergency key. But there was no old emergency key. I had thrown it away the night I installed the new lock. I moved through the house the way I used to move through the pharmacy during inventory. Methodical, precise, checking every shelf and every surface with the kind of attention that most people reserve for contracts and tax returns. The bedroom was untouched. The living room was clean. The bathroom cabinets held only what I had put there. But the kitchen was their theater of operations, and I had been performing my death scene in it every morning for 3 months without knowing the cameras were rolling. I found the second device under the coffee maker. It was small enough to fit inside a bottle cap, a flat black disc pressed against the underside of the machine with adhesive that smelled faintly of industrial epoxy. A microphone, not a camera this time, but an ear, positioned directly beneath the appliance where Corinne and I had brewed our first pot together 25 years ago. They had turned the heart of my home into a listening post, planting their surveillance equipment in the 2 places that held the most meaning. Her photograph, our coffee maker. As if they knew that a man drowning in grief would never look closely at the things that reminded him of his wife, I did not touch it. If they were listening, I needed them to hear nothing unusual. I stepped back from the counter, and for a long moment I just stood there, in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by ghosts and microphones, trying to remember how to breathe. Have you ever stood in a room you have lived in for 30 years and suddenly realized it has been turned into a trap built specifically for you? The memory surfaced without warning, rising from the place where I had buried it under 14 months of grief. Corinne on the hospital bed, 3 days before the end. The light in the room was that terrible fluorescent white that makes everyone look already dead. She was small by then, the cancer having consumed her from the inside the way termites consume a house, leaving the walls standing but hollow. I was holding her hand, and her skin was so thin I could see the blue map of her veins underneath, the last roads her blood would travel. She had been drifting in and out for hours, her words tangled with morphine and memory. I thought she was dreaming when she squeezed my fingers with a strength that should not have been possible and pulled me close. Her breath smelled like metal and medicine. And her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that had read my soul across a coffee counter 3 decades ago, were suddenly sharp with an urgency that cut through the fog of dying. Watch her, Luther. Her voice was a dry whisper, a leaf scraping across stone. She looks at your pill bottles more than she looks at her husband. There is something wrong behind those eyes. I have seen it. Promise me you will watch her. I had brushed it off. A mother's paranoia. The ramblings of a mind losing its grip on the shore. I told her to rest, told her everything was fine, told her Tessa was a lovely woman who made Brendan happy. I patted her hand and changed the subject because I could not bear to spend her final hours talking about suspicion instead of love. Sitting at the kitchen table now, the recipe book open before me and the microphone humming beneath the coffee maker like a mechanical heartbeat, I pressed my forehead against the cool leather of Corinne's journal and cried. Not from fear, not from anger, from the crushing, bone-deep shame of a man who had looked his dying wife in the eyes and told her she was wrong when she was trying with her last breath to save his life. You always read the prescription before I even open the bottle, Corinne. I always thought I was the pharmacist. But you were the one who could see the poison before it ever reached the glass. I wiped my face with my sleeve and reached for my phone. The screen felt cold and heavy as I scrolled to a name I had not called in months. Felix Okafor. We had been friends for 27 years. Ever since he wandered into Marsh and Bean on a rainy Tuesday and ordered the worst possible combination of espresso and cream that I had ever heard a human being request. I made it anyway, because the customer is always wrong, but you serve them with a smile. He came back every day for a decade. Felix was 64 now, a professor of biochemistry at Oregon Health and Science University, with glasses that were always sliding down his nose and a voice like warm oak. He picked up on the third ring, his tone heavy with the fatigue of grading final papers during the holiday break. Luther. Merry almost Thanksgiving. What is the occasion? Felix, I said, and my voice cracked on his name like a plate hitting a tile floor. I think my son is trying to kill me. 5 seconds of silence. I counted them against the ticking of the kitchen clock. When Felix spoke again, the professor was gone, replaced by the clinical precision of a man who had spent 4 decades studying how molecules could save or destroy a human body. Listen to me carefully, Luther. Do not touch anything else in that house. Do not eat or drink anything. Not the coffee, not the water from the tap, not even a breath mint from the kitchen drawer. Put everything you have found into a sealed bag, get in your car, and drive to my lab at the university. I will be waiting at the side entrance. Do you understand me? I understood. I sealed the thermos and the counterfeit pills into Ziploc bags from the pantry drawer, tucked the recipe book under my arm like a shield, and walked out the front door into the Portland rain. The air was cold and clean, the first honest thing I had tasted since 4:47 that morning. I drove down the hill toward the river, windshield wipers keeping a frantic rhythm against the downpour. At the intersection of Hawthorne and 32nd, I slowed without meaning to. There it was. Our shop. Marsh and Bean. The windows were dark, the door padlocked, the awning torn on one side and hanging like a broken wing. Brendan had taken over operations 2 years ago, promising to modernize and expand. Instead, he had gutted it, stripped the copper fixtures Corinne had chosen, and let the space rot while he poured money into a flashy new location across town. The sign above the door was missing letters. Where it once read Marsh and Bean in Corinne's hand-painted script, it now said M blank R S blank and B E blank N, a family name with holes in it, a legacy with the letters falling off one by one. Just like the people who built it. I pressed the gas and drove toward the university, the recipe book warm against my ribs, carrying the last honest words my wife ever wrote toward the only man in Portland who could tell me exactly what was hiding in my morning coffee. The laboratory smelled of ozone and ethanol and the kind of sterile truth that has no room for comfortable lies. Felix Okafor was waiting at the side entrance of the biochemistry building at Oregon Health and Science University, his tall frame backlit by the fluorescent glow of the hallway. He was wearing a rumpled cardigan over a dress shirt that had clearly been slept in, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose at the precarious angle that had been their permanent address for 27 years. He did not say hello. He took one look at my face, grabbed the Ziploc bags from my hands, and pulled me inside. The heavy steel door slammed behind us with a sound that reminded me of a vault ceiling shut. The hallway was empty, the building deserted for the Thanksgiving break, and our footsteps echoed off the tile like a duet played in a cathedral. Felix moved fast for a man of 64, his long legs carrying him toward the end of the corridor, where a reinforced door marked Analytical Chemistry Lab waited with its electronic lock blinking green. Inside, the room was a cathedral of cold precision. Stainless steel counters stretched along the walls, lined with instruments whose names I only half recognized. A centrifuge hummed in the corner like a mechanical prayer. The ventilation system overhead pushed clean, filtered air downward in a constant, invisible waterfall, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a rhythm that felt like a headache waiting to happen. Felix pulled on nitrile gloves and placed the thermos on the counter inside a glass fume hood, treating my morning coffee like it was weapons-grade uranium. He unscrewed the cap using tongs, and even through the protective barrier, I caught the ghost of that metallic whisper that had first raised the hair on my arms in my own kitchen 2 hours ago. "Tell me everything," he said without looking up, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had already calculated the worst possible outcome and was working backward from there. I told him. The dream. The thermos at 5 in the morning. The wrong smell. The recipe book. The 4 ingredients that did not belong. The ivy dying in its pot. The pills that were not pills. The camera in the photograph. The microphone under the coffee maker. I told him about Corinne's warning on her deathbed, and the key that should not have existed, and the scratch marks on a lock that was only 4 weeks old. When I finished, the silence in the lab was so heavy, it felt like a third person in the room. Felix worked without speaking for nearly an hour. He transferred small samples of the coffee into glass vials, added reagents that changed color like mood rings reacting to a secret, and fed them one by one into a machine he called the spectrometer. The device hummed and clicked, processing each sample with a patience that my nerves could not match. I stood beside the stainless steel counter, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone, watching data crawl across the monitor in jagged-colored peaks that looked like a mountain range made of ice. When the spectrometer finally beeped its conclusion, Felix pulled off his glasses and cleaned them on his cardigan. It was the gesture he made when he was about to deliver news that would change the shape of a conversation permanently. I had seen him do it before giving lectures on carcinogens, and it never meant anything good. Luther. There are 3 active compounds in this coffee that have no business being anywhere near a human mouth. He pointed to the first peak on the screen, a sharp red spike. Hydralazine. Hazy. It is a vasodilator, normally prescribed for severe hypertension. At this dosage, taken daily without medical supervision, it would cause progressive drops in blood pressure, dizziness, fatigue, the kind of symptoms that a 61-year-old man might chalk up to grief and aging. He pointed to the second peak, a jagged blue line. Digoxin, a cardiac glycoside. In a controlled dose, it regulates heart rhythm. In an uncontrolled dose, especially in a man whose actual heart medication has been secretly replaced with sugar pills, it creates a time bomb inside the chest, arrhythmia building on arrhythmia, each day adding another crack to the foundation until the whole structure collapses. And this one, Felix said, his finger resting on the third peak, a sickly green spike that was taller than the other 2 combined. This is the one that tells me your daughter-in-law did not learn this recipe from a cooking show. Amatoxin. Modified amatoxin. Specifically, derived from Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom. Somebody has chemically altered it to become soluble at brewing temperature, which means it dissolves invisibly in hot liquid. It is tasteless at this concentration, and nearly undetectable without the specific assay I just ran. In a standard autopsy, it would never be found. He turned to the counterfeit pills next, placing them under a magnification lens and then dissolving one in a reagent that should have turned blue for metoprolol. It stayed clear. Lactose, he said, pressed into a tablet mold. There is no active pharmaceutical ingredient whatsoever. Your heart has been running without its safety net for however long they have been swapping these. I gripped the counter harder. How long do I have? The question came out flat, clinical, the voice of a pharmacist asking about a patient who happened to be himself. Felix met my eyes for the first time since I walked through the door. If you had continued drinking this for another 2 weeks, your heart would have stopped in your sleep. The coroner would have written natural cardiac failure in a 61-year-old male with a history of hypertension. No one would have ordered a toxicology screen. No one would have questioned it. You would have been cremated and mourned and forgotten. And whoever designed this would have collected whatever they stood to gain. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a register I had never heard from him in 27 years of friendship. Luther, the person who engineered this compound, has formal training in biochemistry. This is not the work of someone who read an article on the internet. This is graduate-level pharmacokinetics, applied with the precision of someone who has done it before. The word before hung in the sterile air between us like a blade suspended by a thread. I looked at the green spike on the monitor, the one that represented the death cap toxin modified to dissolve in my morning coffee. And I understood that the woman sleeping in my son's bed was not simply greedy. She was something far worse. I turned toward the laboratory window. The rain had intensified. Portland's skyline blurred behind sheets of gray water, and the parking lot below shimmered under the halogen lights. My eyes swept the rows of cars, the empty spaces, the puddles reflecting the bruised sky. Then my chest seized. 3 rows from the entrance, tucked between a white sedan and a campus shuttle, sat a black pickup truck with tinted windows. The headlights were off, but the windshield wipers were still sweeping, slow and rhythmic, clearing the rain so that whoever sat behind the wheel had a perfect, unobstructed view of the laboratory building entrance. It was Brendan's truck. And he was watching. Agent Diana Soto did not bring holiday greetings when she walked through the laboratory door. She brought a laptop that contained every reason my son needed me dead before Christmas. Felix had made the call while I stood frozen at the window, watching Brendan's truck idle in the rain. A former student, he said. Someone who would understand the intersection of chemistry and crime. I had expected a police officer, maybe a detective in a wrinkled suit. What walked through the reinforced steel door was something else entirely. Soto was 40 years old, with dark hair pulled tight against her skull, and eyes that moved across a room the way a searchlight sweeps a prison yard, missing nothing. She wore a navy blazer over a white shirt. No jewelry, no perfume, nothing decorative or unnecessary. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Financial Crimes Division. She did not shake my hand. She set her laptop on the stainless steel counter beside Felix's spectrometer and opened it with the efficiency of a surgeon cracking a chest. The truck in the parking lot, she said without preamble. Campus security flagged the plates 4 minutes ago. Your son has been sitting out there since you arrived. He is currently being monitored but not approached. We need him comfortable, not spooked. She turned to face me, and I felt the weight of her assessment. It was not unkind, but it was thorough, the look of someone calculating whether the person in front of her could survive what was coming next. Mr. Marsh, I did not come here because of Professor Okafor's phone call. I came because your son has been under federal surveillance for 4 months. The sentence landed in the sterile air like a stone dropped into still water. I felt Felix's hand on my shoulder, steadying me against the counter. 4 months. While I was drinking poisoned coffee and swallowing counterfeit pills and mourning my wife, the federal government had been watching my son from a distance I could not fathom. Soto opened a file on the laptop screen. It was a web of colored lines and nodes that looked like a subway map designed by a paranoid mathematician. Cryptocurrency transactions, she explained, tracing a red line from one node to another. Your son Brendan opened a chain of coffee shops using startup capital that did not come from any legitimate lending institution. The money was funneled through a series of shell companies registered in Delaware, then converted to cryptocurrency, then reconverted to cash through a broker in Tijuana who operates as a financial intermediary for the Sinaloa cartel. She let the word hang. Cartel. It sat in the laboratory air beside the spectrometer readings and the empty Ziploc bags, an obscenity dressed in 5 syllables. Your son owes $3.2 million to people who do not send collection notices, Mr. Marsh. They send consequences. The final repayment deadline is December 31st. That is 5 weeks from today. I stared at the screen until the colored lines blurred. Soto was not finished. She tapped a key, and a new document appeared, a life insurance policy bearing my name and a signature that looked exactly like mine. The coverage had been increased from $2 million to $3.5 million, with Brendan listed as the sole primary beneficiary. The modification date was 3 months ago, the exact week Brendan had started bringing me coffee every morning. I never signed that. I whispered. I know, Soto replied. But someone who can replicate your handwriting did. She pulled up a second document, a last will and testament dated 6 weeks ago. It redistributed my estate with surgical precision, 85% to Brendan, 15% to Joy. My daughter's share had been reduced to a footnote, and my granddaughter Elise was not mentioned at all. Have you ever seen the dollar value your own child placed on your life? $3.5 million in insurance. A house on the hill worth $1.5 million. The coffee shop property worth another $300,000. Added together, my death was worth enough to clear Brendan's debt and leave him with change for a vacation. Soto continued, her voice steady as a metronome. Do you remember a night approximately 2 months ago when your son visited with a bottle of wine? The memory surfaced like a body rising from deep water. A Tuesday evening in late September, Brendan had arrived unannounced with a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir. Expensive. The kind we used to save for Corinne's birthday. He had insisted we open it. Toasted to nothing specific. Kept refilling my glass before I finished. Just one more, Dad. It is a celebration. You deserve something special. I remembered the heaviness that had overtaken me. The way the room blurred at the edges. The thickness in my limbs. I had woken up on the living room couch the next morning with a stiff neck, a pounding headache, and a stack of papers on the hall table. Brendan was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. All warmth and efficiency. Do not worry about those forms, Dad. Just insurance updates. I filed them for you while you rested. Those forms were the new will and the insurance modification, Soto said, watching my face as the recognition landed. You signed both documents under sedation. The notary who witnessed your signature is a known associate of the cartel intermediary your son owes money to. She pulled up one more image. A grainy surveillance photograph taken in the dim light of a diner booth. Brendan and Tessa, sitting across from a heavy-set man in a leather jacket. Papers spread between them on the table. Brendan's face was tense but deliberate. Tessa was leaning forward with her elbows on the table, gesturing with one hand, her expression focused and calculating. They were not panicking. They were negotiating. This was taken 11 days before your son delivered the first thermos to your kitchen, Soto said. They did not stumble into this, Mr. Marsh. They planned it the way you plan a business acquisition. You are not a father to them. You are a line item on a balance sheet. I looked at the photograph, at my son's face across that diner table, and tried to find any trace of the boy who used to help me measure coffee beans into paper bags on Saturday mornings. The boy who named our shop's house Blend after his mother. The boy who cried when we sold the first location because he said it felt like giving away a piece of the family. That boy was not in the photograph. The man sitting across from a cartel intermediary was a stranger, wearing my son's jawline. Soto closed the image and opened another folder. That is the money, Mr. Marsh. Now let me show you the person. Because the woman your son married is not who she told your family she was. How many names can one person carry before none of them are real? The woman I had welcomed into my home, served Thanksgiving turkey to, and trusted to hand me my morning medication, had at least 3. Soto pulled up a photograph on the laptop screen. It was a younger Tessa, maybe 25, standing in front of a stucco building in harsh sunlight, her hair shorter and darker, her face thinner, wearing the kind of expression you see on people who have learned to smile for cameras without ever meaning it. Beneath the photo was a name I had never heard before. Teresa Molina. Born in Tijuana, Soto said, her finger tracing the lines of a biographical file that read like a criminal genealogy. Raised in San Diego after her mother brought her across the border at age 6. Father, Eduardo Molina, currently serving a 30-year federal sentence at the Metropolitan Correctional Center for trafficking fentanyl through cross-border tunnels connecting Tijuana to a warehouse district south of the city. He was not a street dealer, Mr. Marsh. He was an architect. He designed the infrastructure that moved product across international lines. She paused, letting the weight of that settle before she continued. Teresa graduated from the University of California, San Diego, with a degree in biochemistry, specializing in toxic alkaloids and pharmacokinetics. She told your family she studied hospitality management at a community college in Oregon. The transcript she provided to Brendan when they were dating was fabricated. Her real academic record includes a thesis on the bioavailability of naturally occurring hepatotoxins in common fungi. Hepatotoxins, liver poisons. The clinical word landed in my gut like a fist. I thought of the green spike on Felix's spectrometer. the modified amatoxin from the deathcap mushroom, and understood that Tessa had not simply found a recipe online. She had written her own. Years before she ever met my son, Soto scrolled to a new section of the file. But her education is not what brought her to our attention. 5 years ago, a man named Victor Halloran died in San Diego. He was 67 years old, a retired restaurant owner, a widower with no children, and a generous life insurance policy. Does that description sound familiar to you? It sounded like my reflection in a mirror. Halloran met Teresa at a coffee shop near his home. Soto continued. She introduced herself as Tessa Morrison, a barista with a warm smile and a talent for remembering how her regulars liked their morning cup. Within 3 months, she had moved into his house. Within 6 months, she had convinced him to increase his life insurance from $800,000 to $1.2 million and to name her as the sole beneficiary. 8 months after they met, Victor Halloran was found dead in his kitchen, slumped over the breakfast table with a half-finished cup of coffee in front of him. She pulled up the autopsy summary. Cause of death was listed as acute cardiac failure, consistent with age-related degeneration. No toxicology screen was ordered. The attending coroner noted that Halloran had a documented history of high blood pressure and had recently been described by neighbors as confused, forgetful, and increasingly frail. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The words could have been lifted directly from my own life. Confused, forgetful, frail. The same vocabulary Tessa had been stitching into every conversation about me for the past 2 months, building a medical history that did not exist so that when my heart finally stopped, no one would think to ask why. Victor Halloran drank a special coffee blend every morning, Soto said, her voice carrying the careful steadiness of someone delivering a diagnosis they know will change everything. It was prepared by Teresa. She told him it was a recipe from her grandmother in Mexico. A comfort drink, she called it. Something to remind him of warmth and family. The parallel was so precise it made me physically ill. A comfort drink. A grandmother's recipe. The same lie, different wrapping paper, delivered to a different lonely old man in a different kitchen in a different city. I looked at the photograph of Victor Halloran that Soto pulled up next. He was standing in his restaurant, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, holding a white coffee mug with both hands, and smiling the way you smile when you believe the person behind the camera loves you. I saw myself in that photograph, the same trusting posture, the same grateful smile of a widower who thought someone was finally taking care of him. The same blindness to the fact that the coffee in his hands was killing him one sip at a time. She has a method, Soto said. She has a type. Older men, recently widowed, financially comfortable, socially isolated by grief. She enters their lives through routine, through the small daily rituals that lonely people cling to. Coffee in the morning, medication at night, a warm voice asking how you slept. She does not need a weapon because she turns the victim's own habits into the delivery system. I remembered Corinne's deathbed warning with a clarity that burned. She looks at your pill bottles more than she looks at her husband. Corinne had not been delirious. She had been performing the most critical diagnosis of her life, reading the symptoms of a predator the way she read a bad roast. Catching the off note that everyone else missed, Soto closed Victor Halloran's file and opened one final tab. It was a comparison chart showing the timeline of Halloran's decline. Alongside my own, the parallels were laid out in 2 neat columns that made my stomach drop. Month 1. Regular coffee delivery begins. Month 2. Cognitive decline reported to neighbors. Month 3. Insurance policy modified. Month 4. Medication irregularities noted. Month 5. Increasing isolation from family. The only difference between the 2 columns was the name at the top. Victor Halloran's column ended with a death certificate. Mine was still in progress. She does not just have a method, Mr. Marsh, Soto said. She has a brand. Coffee is her instrument. Intimacy is her access point. And your son is not her partner. He is her current host. When his usefulness expires, when the debt is paid and the insurance collected, he will become another Victor Halloran. She will move on to the next name, the next kitchen, the next lonely man holding a mug and believing the lie. I looked at Felix, who had been standing motionless by the spectrometer throughout the briefing. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. He met my eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make any of this smaller. Soto closed the laptop and stood. The fluorescent lights caught the sharp edges of her face, and for a moment, she looked less like a federal agent and more like a surgeon preparing to cut. We have 72 hours before the cartel deadline, Mr. Marsh. Your son's grand opening event for his new coffee chain is scheduled for the night of December 23rd. 50 guests, local press, and the family patriarch who everyone expects to show up looking confused and frail. It is the only window we have, so I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Are you ready to walk into a room full of people who want you dead and pretend you do not know it? The medical tape holding the recording device against my chest was cold enough to make me flinch, but I had grown accustomed to cold hands on my skin. Corinne still touched me every night in my dreams. Soto worked quickly. She positioned a flat transmitter against my sternum, secured it with adhesive strips that pulled at my chest hair, and ran a thin wire along my ribcage to a battery pack against my lower back. The tape smelled faintly of hospital, dragging me back to the room where Corinne spent her last days, and I had to close my eyes and count to 5 before the memory released its grip. Speak normally, she instructed. The microphone captures everything within 6 feet. Do not touch your chest or adjust your shirt. She produced a set of dark horn buttons from a black case. Ordinary looking. The kind you find on any winter coat. But each one contained a pinhole camera, invisible against the fabric. She threaded them through my old wool jacket. They record in every direction you face. Angle your chest toward whoever is speaking. The footage will be admissible. The plan was clinical. I would arrive early at the grand opening, take my seat, and perform the role Tessa had spent months building for me. A confused, declining man grateful for his son's attention. FBI agents would be embedded as waitstaff, guests, and kitchen workers. Felix would attend as a civilian, carrying his lab results on a secure drive. The goal was to provoke incriminating behavior on camera before 50 witnesses. If you feel threatened, use the phrase, "I am feeling a bit chilly," Soto said. That is the extraction signal. But the longer you stay in character, the stronger the case. You are not just a father in that room. You are our primary witness. Do not let the father in you blink. I drove back to Portland alone, the wire pulling with every breath. The city was dressed for the holidays. White lights wrapped the bare elms on Burnside. Shop windows on 23rd glowed with tinsel. Families walked the sidewalks in matching scarves, their laughter visible as small clouds in the cold air. I watched them through the windshield, the way you watch a movie about a life no longer yours. The house was dark when I pulled in. Rain drummed on the roof, and I sat with the engine running, staring at the kitchen window. For 30 years, that window had been the first thing I saw coming home. Corinne's silhouette behind the glass. Warm light spilling onto the porch like a welcome mat made of gold. Now the window was black. The only thing waiting inside was a microphone under the coffee maker. I went in through the front door. The micro was still in place. I did not touch it. I performed for it instead. I moved through the kitchen, making the sounds of a man settling in. Ran the faucet. Opened the refrigerator. Pulled a chair across the floor and sat down heavily, sighing the way tired old men sigh when they think no one is listening. Long day. Think I will heat up some soup and turn in early. Maybe I will have some of Brendan's coffee in the morning. That batch was good. The words tasted like ash. But I delivered them natural and unremarkable, the mundane monologue of a target who had no idea he was being hunted. If Tessa was listening, she would hear exactly what she expected. When the performance ended, I turned off the light and stood in darkness beside the coffee maker. My hand found the top of the machine, metal still warm from the heating element, and I rested my palm there the way you rest your hand on the shoulder of someone you love. 25 years. Corinne and I had stood in this spot every morning, measuring beans, arguing about grind settings, with the passionate specificity of two people who believed a perfect cup was a form of prayer. Now there was a microphone underneath, recording the breathing of the man it was helping to kill. I reached for the recipe book. In darkness, it was just a shape, a rectangle of soft leather that fit my hand the way hers used to. I carried it to the table and opened it by the thin blue light of the stove clock, turning pages I knew by touch, each recipe a chapter of our marriage. Tonight, for the first time, I turned past the last recipe. On the inside of the back cover, in smaller letters than her usual script, Corinne had left a note I had never seen. The secret ingredient is never in the cup, Luther. It is in the choice. Love the right people. Do not waste it on those who are not worthy. And when the recipe goes wrong, have the courage to pour it out and start again. I pressed my thumb against her handwriting until the ink warmed under my skin. She had known. Maybe not the chemistry, or the cartel, or the forged signatures. But she had known something in our family mixture was off, that one ingredient was poison, and she had tried to leave me a prescription for survival in the only language we shared. The doorbell rang. I closed the book and walked to the front door, the wire shifting against my ribs. Through the glass, I saw Joy on the porch, coat soaked. Elise's small sleeping form draped over her shoulder. My daughter's face was white. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking. "Tessa called me an hour ago. She said you need to see a doctor about your memory. She said you have been wandering the neighborhood at night and leaving the stove on. She said you are losing control, and we need to act before you hurt yourself." Is any of that true? I looked at her face, at the fear Tessa had manufactured and injected into my daughter like a slow-acting toxin, and understood that the poisoning was not limited to my coffee. She was dissolving every relationship I had left, one lie at a time. The way acid eats through metal. Elise sat cross-legged on the living room floor, with a box of 64 crayons spread around her like fallen leaves. She did not look up when I walked in. She was drawing with the kind of focus that only children and surgeons possess, her tongue pressed against her upper lip, her small fingers wrapped tight around a crayon the color of rust. Joy was in the kitchen making tea. Real tea. Not from this house. She had brought her own box of chamomile from her apartment in Eugene, and I loved her for that without being able to tell her why. I sat on the couch and watched my granddaughter draw. She had filled 3 pages already. The first was a house with smoke curling from the chimney and a yellow sun with triangular rays. The second was a cat she had named Professor Boots, who did not exist but who she insisted lived under her bed. The third page was still in progress, and it was the one that stopped my breathing. She had drawn a kitchen, a counter, a woman with long brown hair standing next to a row of bottles. One bottle was larger than the others, colored in heavy green crayon, and the woman was pouring something from it into a small cup. Above the bottle, in crooked capital letters, Elise had written, "Vitamins." I leaned forward. My knees cracked. I kept my voice as casual as I could manage. "That is a beautiful picture, sweetheart." "Who is the lady?" "That is Mama Tessa," Elise said without looking up. She picked up a blue crayon and began adding a window behind the counter. "She makes Daddy's special drink every morning. She says it keeps him strong." "Special drink?" "The green bottle. She keeps it in the high cabinet where I cannot reach. She told me it is vitamins for grown-ups, and I should never touch it because it would make my tummy hurt." I stared at the drawing. The green bottle had a small black cap and a label Elise had scribbled in orange. Beside it on the counter she had drawn a second, smaller bottle in red. Next to the red bottle was a stick figure sitting in a chair. The figure had gray hair and glasses. That was me. I picked up the first drawing, the house with the chimney, and held it beside the kitchen scene. In the house drawing, the same green bottle sat on a shelf near the door. Elise had drawn it twice in 2 separate pictures without realizing she had handed me a map of the poison's origin. "Elise, does Mama Tessa bring that green bottle when she visits Grandpa's house?" Sometimes. She puts it in her big purse. The purse with the gold zipper. Joy walked in with 2 mugs. She looked at me, then at the drawing in my hand, then back at me. I set the page down gently. She draws well, I said. She draws constantly, Joy said. She handed me a mug. Luther, we need to talk about what Tessa told me. Not now. She said you forgot where you parked twice last week. She said you left the stove on 3 times. She said you called her Corinne. I have never called her Corinne. I would sooner call a rattlesnake by your mother's name. Joy flinched. She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her mug. Steam rose between us like a curtain. Dad, I am not your enemy. I know exactly who my enemy is. She studied me for a long time. I could see her mother in the way she tilted her head, the way her left eyebrow lifted a fraction higher than the right when she was measuring the truth. Corinne used to do that when I came home late from the shop and told her traffic was bad on Hawthorne. Then tell me, Joy said quietly, because right now, I do not know what to believe. I almost told her everything. The thermos, the dream, the lab results, the wire taped under my shirt at that very moment. But Soto's voice echoed in my skull. Trust no one until the opening night. Not because Joy was guilty, because Joy was honest. And honest people cannot hide what they know. If Tessa saw a single change in Joy's behavior, the entire operation would collapse. After Christmas, I said. I will explain everything after Christmas. Joy opened her mouth to argue. But Elise interrupted by holding up her finished drawing. Look, Grandpa. I made one for you. It was a new page. She had drawn 2 people standing behind a counter. One was tall with a brown apron. The other was small, barely reaching the counter's edge, with a huge smile and a cup in both hands. Above them she had written in shaky letters, Daddy and Grandpa, making Kofi. The air left my lungs. I knew that image. Not from a photograph. From memory. From a Tuesday morning in October 2006, when Brendan was 18 and had asked me to teach him how to pull a proper espresso. He had stood behind the counter at Marsh and Bean wearing Corinne's green apron because it was the only clean one left. His hands had trembled when he tamped the grounds. The first shot had been terrible, sour, thin, under-extracted. He had looked at me with disappointment so heavy it bent his shoulders. I had put my hand on the back of his neck and said, The first cup is always wrong. That is how you learn what right tastes like. He had smiled. Not the magazine cover smile he wore now. A real one. Open and crooked and full of trust. Elise could not have known about that morning. Someone had told her. Someone had described it in enough detail that a 6-year-old could reconstruct it in crayon. And the only person alive who could have done that was the same man who now delivered poison to my kitchen before dawn. Brendan had told his daughter about the day his father taught him to make coffee. And then, he had used coffee to kill that same father. I pressed Elise's drawing against my chest and closed my eyes. In the kitchen, the chamomile tea grew cold. Somewhere across Portland, my son was preparing the grand opening that was meant to be my funeral. And in my pocket, Soto's wire recorded the sound of a grandfather trying not to cry. 3 days before the grand opening, Brendan called me at 7 in the morning. I let the phone ring 4 times before I answered, because a man who is supposedly losing his mind should not sound too alert. Dad. His voice was warm, rehearsed, the same tone he used when he sold investors on the expansion plan. I have a favor to ask. Go ahead. I want you to give a speech at the opening. Nothing long. 3, 4 minutes. Just tell the crowd about Mom's recipe, about Marsh and Bean, about how the family legacy continues. People want to hear from the original founder. I looked at Corinne's photograph on the shelf. The tiny camera lens was still embedded in its corner. Watching me, I made sure my face showed only mild confusion, the expression of a man flattered by attention he did not fully understand. A speech. I repeated slowly. You built this, Dad. The new shop should start with your voice. The new shop. The one financed with cartel money laundered through 3 Delaware shell companies. The one whose opening night was designed to be the last evening I spent upright and breathing. My son wanted me to stand before 50 guests and praise the family name, while his wife poured the final dose into my glass. I would like that, I said. Let me write something down. Do not stress over it. Just speak from the heart. He hung up. I set the phone on the counter and stared at it for a long time. Then I called Soto. She answered on the first ring. She always did. I had learned in 2 weeks that FBI agents do not let phones ring. Every unanswered call is a witness who changes their mind. An informant who disappears. A window that closes and never reopens. He wants me to give a speech, I said. Perfect. I could hear her typing. That puts you at the center of the room with a microphone. Every word recorded. Every face visible. We could not have planned it better. You sound pleased. I am efficient. There is a difference. Meet me at the lab in 1 hour. Felix has something new. I drove to OHSU, through a city that had started to feel like a stranger's dream. Portland in December was all gray sky and wet pavement, and string lights blurred by rain on windshields. Christmas trees glowed behind apartment windows. Families carried shopping bags down Burnside. Normal people doing normal things. I envied every single one of them. Felix was waiting in his lab with 2 monitors running side by side. On the left screen was a chemical analysis. On the right was a surveillance photograph I had not seen before. Sit down, Luther, Felix said. The photograph showed the interior of a kitchen. Not my kitchen. Brendan and Tessa's kitchen, in their Pearl District apartment. The image was slightly grainy, taken through a window at an angle that suggested a long-range lens from across the street. On the counter was a row of amber glass bottles, a digital scale, a set of graduated cylinders, and a ceramic mortar and pestle. Tessa stood at the counter wearing latex gloves and a surgical mask, measuring a clear liquid with the precision of a woman who had done this many times before. This was taken 48 hours ago by one of Soto's field agents, Felix said. She is preparing a concentrated backup dose, stronger than the daily coffee blend. This is what they call an exit formula. Meaning what? Felix removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. He always did this before delivering news that would ruin a room. The daily coffee was designed to weaken your heart gradually. Cumulative damage. But this mixture is different. Hydralazine at triple concentration. Digoxin pushed past therapeutic range into lethal territory. And a new addition, oleander extract, which accelerates cardiac arrhythmia. 1 dose in a single drink would cause ventricular fibrillation within 90 minutes. No hospital within driving distance could reverse it in time. She is building a failsafe, Soto said from the doorway. She had arrived without a sound, which no longer surprised me. If the daily poisoning has not worked by the 23rd, she intends to finish it in 1 shot at the opening. I looked at the photograph again. Tessa's posture was relaxed. Her shoulders were not tense. Her hands were steady. She was not nervous or conflicted or afraid. She was manufacturing my death the way a baker prepares a wedding cake, with calm expertise and professional satisfaction. What about Brendan? I asked. Does he know about the backup dose? Soto pulled a chair beside me and sat down. She placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. The audio was scratchy, recorded through a wall, but the voices were clear. Tessa's voice. If the old man does not collapse by the toast, I will handle it during the 2nd round of drinks. You just keep him talking. Brendan's voice. Quieter. Thinner. What if someone notices? No one notices anything at a party. They are too busy pretending to enjoy themselves. A pause. Then Brendan. Just make it fast. I do not want him to suffer. Soto pressed stop. She looked at me with the flat, patient expression of someone who has delivered recordings of betrayal to parents before and knows there is nothing to say that will make the sound of a son's voice planning a father's death hurt any less. He does not want me to suffer, I said. My voice came out hollow, like a sound bouncing off the walls of an empty shop. That recording is admissible, Soto said. Combined with the physical evidence, the financial trail, and the wire you will carry on the 23rd, we have enough to arrest both of them at the event. But I need you to understand something, Luther. The speech is not a performance. It is a trap. When you stand at that microphone, you are not a father anymore. You are bait. I nodded. I had been bait since the first thermos appeared on my counter at dawn. The only difference now was that I knew it. That night I sat alone in the house and wrote 2 speeches. The first was the one Brendan expected. Warm memories. Corinne's recipe. The smell of fresh beans on a rainy morning. Family legacy. Love passed down through generations. It was 4 minutes long, and every word was true. The second speech was the one I intended to deliver. It was shorter. It contained dates, dollar amounts, chemical names, and a question I planned to ask my son in front of 50 witnesses and 3 hidden federal agents. I folded both speeches and placed them in the inside pocket of my coat, left side, directly above the wire taped to my chest. 2 days. The shop was on Division Street, 3 blocks east of where Corinne and I had opened the original Martian Bean in 1987. I parked across the street at 6:45 and sat in the car for 10 minutes, watching people enter through a glass door framed by strings of white lights. Rain tapped the windshield in a rhythm that sounded like a clock running out of patience. The banner stretched across the front window in gold letters on black canvas. Marsh Coffee. A family legacy. Beneath it, in smaller script, Est. 2024. Founded on tradition. Brewed with love. Brewed with love. I pressed my hand against my chest where the wire sat beneath my shirt, cold as a coin left on a gravestone. Soto's voice crackled through the earpiece hidden behind my left hearing aid. We are in position. 3 agents inside. 2 outside. Felix is seated at the rear table near the emergency exit. Do not look for us. We will find you. Understood. One more thing, Luther. Once you enter that room, everything you say and everything said to you is being recorded by 4 separate devices. The microphone in your coat button, the backup unit on your belt, the directional mic in the ceiling fixture we installed yesterday, and the camera in your glasses. Do not touch your face. Do not adjust your coat. Breathe normally. You are a proud father attending his son's business opening. Nothing more. I stepped out of the car. The rain had slowed to a mist that hung in the air like something undecided. I straightened my tie, the navy one Corinne had given me for our 30th anniversary, and walked across Division Street, toward the gold letters. The interior was beautiful. I will not pretend otherwise. Brendan had always possessed an eye for design that I lacked. The walls were exposed, brick, softened by warm pendant lights. The counter was reclaimed oak, polished to a glow that made it look like honey frozen in time. Behind the bar, an espresso machine sat gleaming like a chrome cathedral. The floor was poured concrete, stained the color of dark roast, and on every table a small white card read, "Welcome to Marsh Coffee, our family's gift to yours." I counted 43 guests, women in cocktail dresses, men in sport coats, a journalist from the Portland Mercury with a recorder on her lanyard, 2 food bloggers photographing the pastry display, a city councilwoman holding a sparkling water and laughing at something Brendan had said. Everyone looked happy. Everyone looked impressed. Nobody looked like they were standing inside a crime scene that had not yet happened. Brendan spotted me from across the room. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie and a smile that could have sold anything to anyone. He crossed the floor in 4 strides and wrapped me in a hug that pressed the wire harder against my ribs. "Dad, you made it. I would not miss this. You look good." Rested. I had not slept more than 3 hours in the past week. My hands had a tremor I controlled by keeping them in my pockets. My blood pressure was erratic, from weeks of counterfeit medication. I looked like a man being slowly killed, which is precisely what I was. Your mother would have loved this place, I said. That was not a lie. Brendan's smile flickered for exactly 1 second. A micro-expression. Guilt or grief, or the memory of a woman he was willing to dishonor for $3.2 million. Then the smile returned, brighter and more practiced than before. Come, let me get you a drink. He led me to the bar. Tessa stood behind it in a black dress, with her hair pinned up, looking like the elegant co-owner of a legitimate business. She smiled when she saw me. The smile did not reach past her cheekbones. Luther, we saved the best seat for you. She gestured to a stool at the end of the counter, directly beneath a pendant light. I understood the position. It placed me in full view of the room, visible to every guest, isolated from exits, and within arm's reach of whatever she intended to pour. I sat down. The stool was high enough that my feet did not touch the floor rail. A small detail, but it mattered. A man whose feet cannot touch the ground is a man who cannot run. What can I make you? Tessa asked. Surprise me. She turned to the espresso machine. Her hands moved with the same calm precision Felix and I had seen in the surveillance photograph. She pulled a double shot, steamed milk to a microfoam, and reached beneath the counter for a small amber bottle that she uncapped with her thumb. 1 drop. 2 drops. She tilted the bottle slightly on the third pour, letting it fall heavy. Then the bottle vanished below the counter, and she dusted the surface of the latte with cinnamon and placed it in front of me on a black ceramic saucer. How special, she said. In honor of the founder. The latte was perfect in appearance. A Rosetta pattern floated on the microfoam, each curve symmetrical, each line sharp. It looked like something a magazine would photograph. It smelled like caramel and vanilla and warmth and Christmas and the careful, methodical work of a woman who had killed before. I lifted the cup. I brought it close enough to my lips that the steam touched my skin. In my earpiece, Soto said nothing. She did not need to. The 4 recording devices captured the moment in silence. I set the cup down without drinking. I want to wait, I said. I will drink it during my speech. A toast to the family. Tessa's eyes held mine for 3 seconds. Then she nodded. Of course. That is even better. Across the room, Brendan tapped a knife against a champagne glass. The crowd quieted. 43 faces turned toward the bar where I sat beneath the pendant light, my feet above the ground, a poisoned latte growing cold on the black saucer in front of me. Ladies and gentlemen, Brendan said, thank you for being here tonight. Before we go any further, I would like to invite someone very special to say a few words. The man who started it all. The man who taught me everything I know about coffee, about craft, and about family. My father, Luther Marsh. Applause filled the room like a wave. I stood from the stool. My feet found the floor. I reached into my coat pocket and felt 2 folded speeches. The left one was warm nostalgia. The right one was the truth. I chose the right. I unfolded the speech and placed it on the counter beside the poisoned latte. The paper trembled in my hand, so I pressed my palm flat against it and waited until the shaking stopped. 43 faces watched me from the warm amber glow of a room that smelled like fresh espresso and cinnamon and betrayal. Thank you, Brendan, I said into the microphone. My voice was steady. I do not know how. Thank you all for coming tonight. My son asked me to say a few words about family and coffee and legacy, so I will. I paused. I looked at the room. The journalist had her recorder raised. The food bloggers had their phones aimed at me. The councilwoman sipped her sparkling water. Felix sat at the rear table near the emergency exit. His hands folded, his face deliberately blank. Somewhere in the crowd, 3 federal agents waited for a signal I had not yet been told. My wife Corinne and I opened Marsh and Bean on Hawthorne Boulevard in 1987, I said. We had $4,000, a 10-year lease, and 1 espresso machine that broke down every Thursday. Corinne ran the front. I ran the roaster. Our first customer was a retired postal worker named Jean, who ordered a drip coffee and told us it was the worst thing he had ever tasted. He came back every day for 26 years. Laughter. Warm, generous, trusting laughter. The kind that fills a room and makes strangers feel like friends. I let it settle. Corinne believed that coffee was not a product. It was a language. Every cup carried a message. Welcome. Stay. You matter. She wrote her recipes by hand in a leather notebook, and she guarded them the way some people guard diamonds. Not because they were worth money, because they were honest. I picked up the latte from the saucer. I held it in front of me so the crowd could see the Rosetta pattern floating on the microfoam. This cup was made for me tonight by my daughter-in-law, Tessa. She called it the house special. In honor of the founder, I tilted the cup slightly. The pendant light caught the surface. It is a beautiful cup of coffee. Caramel. Vanilla. Cinnamon. Perfect foam. Perfect temperature. My wife would have admired the technique. I set the cup down, but my wife would have also noticed what I noticed. Because Corinne could taste a single misplaced gram of sugar in a 12-ounce pour. And this cup contains something that does not belong in any coffee recipe ever written. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable silence between sentences. A different silence. The kind that falls when a crowd collectively realizes that the evening has changed direction and nobody told them. I opened Corinne's recipe book. I had brought it in my coat pocket. Pressed against the second speech I would never need to read. I held the book open to the page labeled House Blend Original, written in Corinne's handwriting, blue ink, slightly slanted to the right the way all her writing leaned, as if her words were always in a hurry to reach the margin. Colombian Supremo, 60%. Ethiopian Sidamo, 30%. Saigon Cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon. Vanilla bean, scraped, not extract. Water at 203 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the recipe. 6 ingredients. Nothing else. I turned to face Tessa. She stood behind the bar with her hands resting on the counter. Her posture had not changed. Her face had not changed. But her knuckles were white against the oak. Tessa, would you like to tell these guests what you added to this cup that is not on this page? Silence. Brendan took a half step forward from the side of the room. His champagne glass was still in his hand. His face had lost its color in a way that made him look like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Dad, what are you doing? His voice was low, controlled. The voice of a man trying to steer a car that has already left the road. I am reading your mother's recipe, Brendan. And I am asking why the coffee your wife made for me tonight contains 3 compounds that have no business in any cup served to a human being. I reached into my coat and removed a small ultraviolet penlight that Soto had given me the previous night. It was the size of a marker, black casing, with a single button on the side. Soto had explained that the amatoxin derivative Tessa used would fluoresce under 365 nanometer UV light, producing a faint blue-green glow invisible to the naked eye under normal conditions. I clicked the penlight on and held it over the latte. The surface of the coffee lit up. A pale, ghostly blue-green luminescence spread across the foam, concentrated in the center where the Rosetta pattern had been poured, bleeding outward toward the rim. It looked like bioluminescence in a dark ocean. It looked like something alive and wrong, glowing in a place where only warmth and caffeine should exist. The journalist lowered her recorder. One of the food bloggers whispered something unprintable. The councilwoman set her sparkling water down so carefully it made no sound. That glow, I said, holding the light steady, is a compound called amatoxin. It comes from the deathcap mushroom. In sufficient doses, it destroys the liver and stops the heart. It has been in my coffee every morning for the past 6 weeks. Delivered by my son. Prepared by his wife. Brendan dropped his champagne glass. It hit the concrete floor and shattered into pieces that scattered beneath the nearest table. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody moved at all. Tessa's hands slid off the counter. She took one step backward toward the espresso machine. Her eyes moved to the front door, then to the emergency exit at the rear where Felix sat, then back to me. She was calculating distance and time the way she calculated milligrams and dosages, with cold precision and no wasted motion. "Luther," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "You are confused. This is exactly what your doctor warned us about. The paranoia. The delusions. Brendan, call Dr. Harmon." "There is no Dr. Harmon," I said. "There never was. The prescription pad was forged. The pills you replaced my metoprolol with are lactose tablets, with no active ingredient. You have been dismantling my medication while poisoning my coffee. And you have been doing it on a schedule designed to make my death look like natural cardiac failure before December 31st. I held up the UV light, so every person in the room could see the blue-green glow still pulsing in the cup. This is not a family legacy. This is a crime scene. Tessa did not run. That surprised me. I had expected her to bolt for the emergency exit the moment the UV light touched the foam. I had imagined it a dozen times in the sleepless hours before this night, her black dress disappearing through the rear door, Felix standing to block her path. Agents converging from both sides of Division Street. But she did none of that. She stood behind the counter with her hands at her sides and looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not fear, not anger. Recognition. The look of a professional who understands that the operation is over, and the only remaining question is how much dignity can be salvaged from the wreckage. "You were never supposed to notice," she said. The room heard it. Every word. The journalist's recorder was still running. The directional microphone in the ceiling fixture captured the frequency of her voice with a clarity that would later be described by the prosecution as devastating. "The formula was perfect," Tessa continued. She spoke the way a surgeon might discuss a procedure that had failed due to external complications. Clinical. Detached. Proud. Hydralazine to lower blood pressure and mask the cardiac symptoms. Digoxin at subtherapeutic levels to destabilize the heart rhythm gradually. Amatoxin to attack the liver, creating a cascade of organ failure that would present as natural degeneration in a man your age. Every dose calibrated to your body weight. Every morning delivered at the same time to maintain consistent blood levels. 3 months. That is all it would have taken. You would have died in your sleep and the coroner would have written cardiac arrest secondary to chronic heart failure, and nobody in this room would have questioned it. She paused. She looked at the glowing cup on the counter between us. "The coffee was my thesis. My life's work. And you ruined it. Because a dead woman talked to you in a dream." I heard Soto's voice in my earpiece. One word. Now. 3 people stood up from different tables at the same time. A man in a gray sport coat near the window. A woman in a burgundy dress by the pastry display. A third man who had been leaning against the far wall, holding what everyone assumed was a craft beer. They moved through the crowd without urgency, with the practiced calm of people who have made arrests in public spaces before, and understand that panic is contagious, and silence is a tool. The man in the gray coat reached Tessa first. He placed his hand on the counter beside hers and said, "Teresa Molina, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. Place your hands on the counter." Tessa placed her hands on the counter. She did not resist. She did not speak. She turned her head once to look at Brendan, who stood frozen near the center of the room, surrounded by shattered champagne glass and 43 witnesses who would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The woman in the burgundy dress reached Brendan. She spoke his name softly, the way a nurse might speak to a patient before delivering an injection. "Brendan Marsh, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and forgery." Brendan did not move. His arms hung at his sides. His mouth was open, but no sound came from it. He looked at me across the room with eyes that held something I had spent weeks trying not to hope for. Shame. Not the performed shame of a man caught in a lie. The real kind. The kind that starts in the stomach and moves upward until it fills the chest and throat and makes breathing feel like swallowing broken glass. "Dad," he said. Just that. One syllable. The same syllable he had spoken thousands of times across 38 years. When he fell off his bicycle on Hawthorne at age 7, when he failed his first chemistry exam at Oregon State, when he called me from a payphone at 2 in the morning during his junior year because a girl had broken his heart, and he did not know how to make the pain stop. Dad. The word that once meant safety now sounded like an apology that had arrived 30 seconds too late. The agent placed handcuffs on my son's wrists. The metal clicked twice. Brendan's head dropped. His chin touched his chest, and his shoulders curved inward. And he looked, for one terrible instant, exactly like the 18-year-old boy who had pulled a bad espresso shot in his mother's green apron and bent under the weight of his own disappointment. I stepped down from the microphone. My legs held, though I could not feel them. I walked toward the counter, where the poisoned latte still glowed beneath the UV light. Beside the saucer, half hidden by a napkin, was a small gift tag I had not noticed before. It was cream-colored with a red ribbon tied through a hole in the corner. Written in Brendan's handwriting, the same handwriting that had once left me birthday cards under my pillow, were 5 words. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Love, Brendan." I picked up the tag. The ribbon was silk. The ink was fresh. He had written it tonight, probably in the car before walking in. He had planned to kill me, and he had written me a Christmas card, and he had placed them on the same counter 6 inches apart, and I could not reconcile those two facts in any language I knew. I put the tag in my pocket next to the speech I had read and the speech I had not. The agents escorted Tessa toward the front door. She walked between them with her back straight and her head high, as if she were leaving a restaurant after a disappointing meal rather than being arrested for attempted murder. At the door, she stopped. She turned her head and looked at me one final time. He would have inherited everything, Luther. The shop, the brand, the name. I was giving him what you never could. A future without debt. You were giving him a prison cell, I said. She smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever seen on a human face. Colder than the concrete floor. Colder than the handcuffs on my son's wrists. Colder than the blue-green glow still shimmering in the cup that was supposed to be my last. They led her out. The glass door closed behind her. The white string lights continued to blink, as if nothing had happened, as if the evening were still going according to plan. Brendan was led past me toward the same door. As he passed, close enough that I could smell his cologne and the faint trace of espresso on his collar, he turned his head and whispered something so quiet that only I and the wire taped to my chest could hear it. "I am sorry. I was not strong enough." Then he was gone. The door closed again. The string lights blinked again, and I stood alone in the middle of a room full of strangers, holding a Christmas tag that said, "Love from a man who had tried to pour death into my morning coffee," while the most beautiful latte I had ever seen glowed blue-green on a black saucer under the light of a shop named after my family. The guests left in clusters of 2 and 3, whispering to each other as they pushed through the glass door into the December rain. Nobody said goodbye to me. Nobody knew what to say. A few looked back over their shoulders, with expressions that sat somewhere between sympathy and the particular discomfort of people who have witnessed something private and violent, and wish they could unwatch it. The journalist was the last to leave. She paused at the door, turned, and opened her mouth as if she were about to ask a question. Then she closed it, nodded once, and disappeared into the wet dark of Division Street. I stood behind the counter for a long time after the room emptied. The pendant lights still burned. The espresso machine still hummed. The latte still sat on its black saucer. The Rosetta pattern now collapsed into a flat beige surface. The blue-green glow faded since I had clicked off the UV light. It looked like an ordinary cup of cold coffee. It looked like nothing dangerous at all. That was the genius of it, I suppose. The deadliest things always look like the things you trust the most. Felix left through the emergency exit after squeezing my shoulder once without speaking. Soto's voice came through the earpiece a final time. Evidence is secured. Agents are transporting both suspects to the federal building. I will need you at the field office tomorrow at 9 for a full deposition. Get some rest, Luther. The earpiece went silent. I removed it and placed it on the counter next to the latte. Then I removed the wire from beneath my shirt. The medical tape pulled at the hair on my chest, and the small sting of it was the first physical sensation I had felt in over an hour. Everything else had been numb. My hands, my feet, my face. As if my body had decided that feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. I sat down on the stool where Tessa had positioned me. My feet dangled above the floor rail. I did not try to reach it. I sat there like a child in a chair built for adults and stared at the banner above the window. Marsh Coffee, a family legacy. The gold letters caught the pendant light and glowed against the black canvas. And I thought about how much money Brendan must have spent on that banner, and whether the cartel had paid for it, or whether he had used the last honest dollars in his account to spell out a lie in metallic paint. The front door opened. Rain and cold air entered together, and behind them came Joy. She was wearing the green coat she always wore in winter, the one with the oversized buttons that Corinne had found at a vintage shop in the Pearl District, and had wrapped in newspaper for Joy's 28th birthday. Her hair was wet. Her eyes were red. She had been crying in the car. I could tell, because Joy was the kind of person who believed that tears should be private and composure should be public, a trait she had inherited entirely from her mother. She did not ask questions. She walked behind the counter, pulled a second stool beside mine, and sat down. Our shoulders touched. We looked at the empty room together. I watched from the back. She said after a while, "Felix let me in through the emergency exit before you started speaking. You heard everything." I heard everything. I nodded. I did not know what to say after that. The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people sitting in the ruins of something they both loved, surveying the damage, not yet ready to decide what to rebuild and what to leave broken. "He wrote me a Christmas card," I said. I reached into my pocket and placed the gift tag on the counter. The red silk ribbon curled against the oak. Joy looked at it for a long time. "That is his handwriting," she said. "Yes. Merry Christmas, Dad. Love. Brendan." "Yes." Joy picked up the tag and held it the way a person holds a photograph of someone who has died. Carefully. With both hands. As if the object itself might still contain some fragment of the person who made it. "He meant it," she said quietly. "That is the worst part. He meant the love and he meant the poison, and he could not see that those two things cannot exist in the same sentence." I had nothing to add to that. She had said it better than I ever could. We sat together for another 20 minutes. The rain grew heavier outside. The string lights on the storefront blinked in their patient, mechanical rhythm. At some point, Joy reached over and poured the latte into the sink behind the bar. She rinsed the cup twice, then placed it upside down on the drying rack. A simple act, a necessary one. The evidence had already been photographed and logged by Soto's team. What remained in the cup was just cold liquid and bad memory, and Joy understood that her father did not need to keep staring at either. "Come home with me tonight," she said. "Elise has been asking about you. She drew you another picture. A Christmas tree with a coffee cup on top instead of a star." I almost smiled. "I need to get something first." I reached into my coat and pulled out Corinne's recipe book. I had carried it against my chest all evening, pressed between the two speeches. The leather was warm from my body heat. I opened it to the back cover where I had found Corinne's first hidden note weeks ago. The secret ingredient is never in the cup. But now, under the pendant light, I noticed something I had missed before. The back cover's end paper was slightly thicker on the left side than the right. A faint ridge ran along the inner seam, barely visible, as if something thin and flat had been sealed between the end paper and the leather. I pressed my thumb along the ridge. The end paper resisted, then gave. A small pocket, hand-stitched with thread, that matched the leather so closely it was nearly invisible, opened along the seam. Inside was a single folded page, yellowed at the edges, sealed with a drop of candle wax stamped with the letter C, Corinne's initial. I held the page in my hand. I did not open it. Not yet. Not in this room, under this banner, on this night. Whatever Corinne had hidden in the spine of her recipe book had waited this long. It could wait until I was ready to read it in a place that still felt like home. I put the page back in the book. I closed the cover. I stood up from the stool and let my feet touch the ground. "Let us go," I said to Joy. "Take me to the Christmas tree." With the coffee cup on top. The trial lasted 11 days. I sat in the third row of the federal courthouse on Southwest 3rd Avenue, wearing the same navy tie every morning because it was the only piece of clothing that still felt like armor. Joy sat beside me. Elise stayed with Joy's neighbor in Eugene, too young to understand why her grandfather spent his mornings in a building with metal detectors and guards who did not smile. The prosecution built its case. The young spilt chemical analyses, one layer at a time. Each piece of evidence locked into the piece before it until the structure was so dense that no argument could pass through it. The thermos, the counterfeit pills, the audio recording from the apartment, the surveillance photograph of Tessa measuring oleander extract in latex gloves, the UV-lit latte, the forged insurance documents, the forged will, the wire recording from the grand opening, Tessa's own words, played for the jury in a courtroom so silent I could hear the bailiff breathing. The formula was perfect. Tessa's attorney argued diminished capacity. He claimed she had been coerced by cartel threats against her family, that her father, Eduardo Molina's imprisonment, had left her vulnerable to manipulation, that Brendan had been the architect and she the instrument. The jury did not believe him. 12 people looked at the surveillance photograph of a woman calmly measuring poison in her own kitchen and concluded that coercion does not wear latex gloves and a steady hand. Teresa Molina was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, identity fraud. She stood when the judge read the sentence. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She looked straight ahead with the same expression she had worn behind the coffee bar on the night I held the UV light over her Rosetta, the expression of a woman who had calculated every variable except the one she could not measure. A dead wife who refused to stay silent. Brendan's trial was shorter. His attorney negotiated a partial cooperation agreement. Brendan provided financial records, identified the cartel intermediary, confirmed the timeline of the poisoning schedule, and testified that Tessa had designed the formula and managed the dosages. In exchange, the prosecution recommended a reduced sentence. The judge accepted. Brendan Marsh was sentenced to 12 years. Conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, forgery. He cried when the sentence was read, not the controlled, strategic tears of a man performing remorse for a jury, the raw, airless kind that bends a body at the waist and makes sounds that do not resemble any language. I watched my son collapse in a federal courtroom, and I felt nothing. That was the part that frightened me most. Not anger, not grief. Nothing. As if the place inside me where fatherhood had lived for 38 years had been emptied out and swept clean, and the door had been closed and locked from the inside. Joy found the forged will during the second week of the trial. She had been organizing documents for the prosecution when she opened a manila envelope labeled estate planning and discovered the version that allocated 85% of my assets to Brendan and 15% to her. She brought it to me during a recess. She held it in front of me with both hands and said, "Did you know about this?" Soto showed me. 15%. He gave me 15% and erased Elise completely. He did not write it. Tessa wrote it. He signed it. That does not make it better, Dad. She was right. It did not. After the sentencing, I drove back to Portland and entered a period I can only describe as absence. The house on Glisson Street was too quiet. Every room held a memory that now carried a second meaning. The kitchen where Brendan had delivered the thermos, the shelf where Corinne's photograph had hidden a camera, the back door with the scratched lock. I moved through these rooms like a man walking through a museum exhibit of his own life, observing the artifacts, but unable to touch them. I stopped drinking coffee. The smell alone triggered a nausea so immediate and violent that I had to leave the room. 40 years of mornings built around the ritual of grinding beans and heating water and pouring a careful cup, and now the scent of a fresh roast made my stomach convulse, and my hands shake, and my throat close, as if my body had decided, independently of my mind, that coffee was no longer a comfort. It was a weapon, and my body wanted no part of it. I lost 11 pounds in 6 weeks. I slept in 3-hour intervals. I sat in the living room at 4 in the morning and stared at the wall where Corinne's photograph used to hang. I had removed it the day after the arrest and placed it in a drawer because I could not look at her face without seeing the camera lens embedded in the corner and wondering how many hours of footage Tessa had collected of me drinking poison and believing it was love. Joy drove from Eugene every Saturday. She brought groceries. She cooked meals I barely touched. She cleaned the kitchen without comment. She sat with me on the couch and watched television I did not follow. She did not push. She did not lecture. She waited. The way Corinne had always waited. When I retreated into silence after a bad month at the shop, with patience and presence and the quiet faith that the person she loved would eventually find his way back to the surface. On the 7th Saturday, Joy arrived with a paper bag from a tea shop in Eugene. She set it on the counter and unpacked a box of loose-leaf chamomile, a ceramic teapot glazed in pale blue, and 2 cups without handles, the kind used in Japanese tea ceremonies. "We are starting over," she said. "No coffee. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we are not going to sit in this house without something warm in our hands." She boiled water. She measured the chamomile with the same care Corinne used to measure Sadamo. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of me. The steam rose straight and thin in the still air of the kitchen. I picked up the cup. It was warm. It smelled like dried flowers and honey and nothing dangerous. I drank it. The heat moved through my chest and settled somewhere behind my ribs where the numbness had lived for 6 weeks, and I felt, for the first time since the grand opening, something that was not absence. Joy watched me drink. She did not smile. She nodded. One small nod. The same nod her mother used to give me when I did something right, and she wanted me to know it without making a fuss. "Tomorrow," she said, "we talk about what comes next." I visited Brendan once. March 15th. A Saturday. The Federal Correctional Facility in Sheridan sat 70 miles southwest of Portland, in a valley surrounded by Douglas fir and rain that never seemed to stop. I drove alone. Joy had offered to come, but I told her this was something a man does by himself, the way you close a door by yourself when you are the last one leaving a house that is no longer yours. The visiting room was beige, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a table between us the width of a coffin. Brendan sat on the other side, in a khaki uniform that made his shoulders look smaller than I remembered. His face was thinner. His jaw, the one Joy used to joke belonged on a magazine cover, had lost its definition. His hands rested on the table, palms down, fingers spread, as if he were trying to hold the surface steady. We looked at each other for a long time before either of us spoke. I studied him the way I used to study bridge joints during inspections. Before the coffee shop. Before Corinne convinced me to trade engineering for espresso. I looked for fractures. I looked for load-bearing failures. I looked for the point where the structure had begun to give. "You look tired, Dad." "I am." "Are you eating?" "Joy makes sure of it." He nodded. His fingers curled slightly against the table. He opened his mouth twice before the words came. "I wrote you letters. 7 of them. Did you read them?" "I received them. But did you read them?" "I read the first one. I held the other 6 over the kitchen sink and burned them with a match. His face did not change. He absorbed the information the way a wall absorbs a nail, with resistance and then acceptance and a small permanent hole. Why the first one? Because I needed to know if you would tell the truth at least once without a federal agent in the room. Did I? You blamed Tessa for everything. You said she manipulated you. You said the debt consumed you. You said you had no choice. That is the truth. That is a version of the truth that allows you to sleep. It is not the same thing. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. But he did not let the tears fall. He had learned that much in 3 months of incarceration. Tears in a visiting room are a performance. Dry eyes that want to cry are closer to honesty. What do you want me to say, Dad? Nothing. I did not come here to hear you say anything. I came here to say something to myself, and I needed you sitting across from me when I said it. He waited. The fluorescent lights above us hummed at a frequency that sounded like a machine pretending to be calm. I failed you, I said. Not in the way you think. I did not fail you by being too strict or too absent or too focused on the shop. I failed you by assuming that loving you was the same as knowing you. I watched you grow up in my house and I never once saw the fracture forming. I never asked why you married a woman whose past did not add up. I never questioned why a man earning $120,000 a year suddenly needed to expand a coffee brand into 4 new cities. I never looked because I did not want to find anything wrong. And that is my failure. Not yours. Mine. Brendan's hands trembled on the table. A guard shifted his weight by the door. So I am forgiving myself, I said. Not you. You will have to find your own forgiveness somewhere inside 12 years. And whatever is left of the man you were before Tessa taught you, that love and poison can be poured from the same bottle. But I cannot carry the weight of believing I should have saved you. I carried it for 3 months, and it nearly killed me more efficiently than the coffee did. I stood up. The plastic chair did not move because it was bolted to the floor, and there was something appropriate about that. Some things in a prison are fixed in place. Some things cannot be rearranged to make the room more comfortable. Goodbye, Brendan. Dad. Please. Goodbye. I walked out of the visiting room and through the corridor and past the security checkpoint and into the parking lot, where the rain hit my face like a cold hand pressing me back into the world. I sat in the car for 20 minutes before I started the engine. I was not crying. I was recalibrating. Adjusting the internal architecture of a man who had just amputated something essential and was learning how to stand without it. I drove home and listed the Gleason Street house the following Monday. The realtor, a woman named Catherine, with silver hair, and a manner that suggested she had sold homes owned by difficult histories before, walked through every room and made notes on a clipboard without asking why a man would sell a house he had lived in for 31 years. She listed it at $680,000. It sold in 9 days to a young couple who planned to renovate the kitchen. I hoped they would tear out the shelf where Corinne's photograph had hung. I hoped they would replace the back door with the scratched lock. I hoped they would fill the house with sounds that had nothing to do with mine. I moved my belongings into Joy's guest room in Eugene. 3 suitcases, a box of books, Corinne's recipe book, and the sealed page I had not yet opened. Everything else I donated or discarded. 31 years of furniture and kitchenware and framed pictures and holiday decorations reduced to what one man could carry in 2 trips from a rented van. On the first night in Joy's house, after Elise had gone to bed and Joy had retreated to her room, I sat at the kitchen table with the recipe book open in front of me. The sealed page rested in my palm. The candle wax stamped with the letter C had aged to a deep amber. The paper was thin but firm, the kind Corinne used for important documents. Cotton blend stationery she ordered from a shop in Ashland that had closed 6 years before she died. I broke the seal with my thumbnail. The wax cracked cleanly, splitting the C into 2 halves. Inside was a single page folded into thirds. I unfolded it and found not a letter but a series of handwritten instructions. At the top, in Corinne's slanted blue ink, was a heading I did not expect. Cannon Beach Safe Deposit Box 714. Key taped to the inside cover of the 1994 photo album. Do not open until you are ready to start again. I turned the page over. On the back, in smaller writing, Corinne had added one line. You will know when it is time, Luther. Trust the morning. I closed the recipe book. I walked to the box of belongings I had carried from the van. The 1994 photo album was at the bottom, beneath 2 novels and a stack of tax documents I should have discarded years ago. I opened the front cover, taped to the inside with a strip of clear packing tape. Invisible unless you were looking for it, was a small brass key with the number 714 engraved on its bow. I held the key up to the kitchen light. It was warm from being pressed inside the album for what must have been years. Corinne had hidden it while she was still alive, while she was still healthy, while she still believed that one day I would need a door she had already unlocked. I closed my hand around the key and held it against my chest. Tomorrow, I would drive to Cannon Beach. The drive from Eugene to Cannon Beach took 3 hours. Highway 126 west through the Coast Range, then 101 north along the ocean. The rain stopped 20 miles before the coast and the sky opened into a pale gray that looked like a healing wound. Cannon Beach appeared quietly, as if the town had been waiting behind the fog. Haystack Rock stood in the surf like a cathedral, built by something older than language. Corinne and I had come here every August for 19 years. Same rental cottage on Hemlock Street. Same stretch of beach at low tide. Same coffee on the porch while the waves reorganized the sand. We said very little during those mornings because we had reached the stage of marriage where silence between 2 people who love each other is not empty. It is full. The bank was on the main street, a small brick building with green trim. I walked in at 10:15 carrying the brass key. A woman at the front desk checked my identification against a signature card on file and led me to the vault. Box 714 was on the second row from the bottom. The woman inserted the master key and stepped back. I inserted the brass key. It turned with a resistance that softened halfway, as if the lock had been waiting and was relieved to finally open. Inside were 3 items. A thick manila envelope sealed with clear tape. A smaller white envelope with my name, in Corinne's handwriting, and a brass plate, 8 inches wide, polished to a warm glow that caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in soft gold. The plate read, Marsh and Binest, 1987, the original sign from the Hawthorne shop. The sign I thought had been lost when the building changed owners in 2019. The sign Corinne and I had hung together on a Sunday morning in April 1987, standing on a borrowed stepladder while a man walking his dog stopped and said, Good luck. You are going to need it. I held the plate against my chest. The vault door was closed. I was alone. The sound that came out of me was not crying. It was deeper. The sound of a man discovering that the person he lost had spent her final years building a hidden architecture of protection around him, scaffolding he could not see until the building of his life had been demolished, and the scaffolding was the only thing left standing. I opened the manila envelope. 3 documents. The first was a trust agreement dated 4 years before Corinne's death, establishing the Corinne Marsh family trust with me as sole beneficiary. $247,000 in a money market account in Astoria. The second was a deed transfer for a small commercial property on Hemlock Street in Cannon Beach. A coffee shop. Corinne had bought a coffee shop 3 blocks from the beach, where we spent every August. The third was a life insurance policy, separate from anything Brendan had known about or forged, with a payout of $350,000, already executed. The funds sat in the Astoria account, bringing the total to just under $600,000. Corinne had built a financial safety net so carefully concealed that neither Brendan nor Tessa had discovered it. They had forged a will for an estate they believed they understood completely and missed an entire parallel structure hidden in a coastal town 70 miles from Portland, under a trust name that appeared in none of the household records. I opened the white envelope. A single handwritten page. Blue ink. Right-leaning slant. The letters pressed slowly into the paper, formed with deliberate care, as if her hands had not always cooperated when she wrote it. Luther, if you are reading this, something has gone wrong, and you have needed to start again. I am sorry I am not there to hand you this key in person, instead of hiding it inside a photo album, like a woman in a spy novel. The shop on Hemlock Street is yours. I found it during one of our August trips, the summer you had bronchitis, and stayed on the porch while I walked into town for cough drops. It was empty. The windows were dirty. I looked through the glass and saw exactly what I saw when we found the Hawthorne space in 1987. A place where someone could build something warm. I bought it because I know you. If the world takes everything, the only way you will heal is by making coffee for strangers and calling them by name and remembering that the best thing a person can do with their hands is give someone else a reason to sit down and stay. The money is enough to renovate and open. The brass sign is yours to hang again. The recipe book has everything you need. Do not name it Martian bean. That belongs to a different time. Name it something that reminds you of me, but also reminds you that you are still here. Being here is enough. I loved you before coffee, and I will love you after it. Whatever after means for someone like me. Start again. Corinne. I folded the letter along its original creases and placed it inside the recipe book between house blend and Ethiopian single origin, where it would rest between the two recipes she loved most. I picked up the brass sign and the trust documents. I closed box 714 and walked out of the vault and through the corridor and past the woman at the desk who said, "Have a good day, sir," and into the Cannon Beach morning, where the fog had lifted enough to show the top of Haystack Rock. I drove 3 blocks to Hemlock Street. The shop was there. Small, brick front, dirty windows, a faded rent sign hanging crooked in the glass. I parked across the street and looked at it the way I had looked at the Hawthorne space 38 years ago, with terror and hope and the certainty that the woman I loved had seen something I could not yet see and trusted me to build it. I held the brass sign in my lap. Marsh and Beanest. 1987. Not this time. This time the sign would say something different. The renovation took 4 months. I did most of the work myself because a man who spent 20 years inspecting bridges understands load-bearing walls and plumbing runs and the particular stubbornness of old brick that refuses to accept new mortar without a fight. Joy drove from Eugene on weekends with Elise in the back seat and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and the kind of steady encouragement that does not announce itself but simply shows up and hands you a level when you need one. I stripped the floors down to the original fir planks and sealed them with a matte finish that let the grain show through. I replaced the front windows with double-pane glass that kept the coastal fog outside where it belonged. I built the counter from reclaimed Douglas fir I found at a salvage yard in Tillamook, sanded it by hand over 3 weekends until the surface felt like something between silk and warm stone. Behind the counter I installed a 2-group espresso machine, not chrome, not cathedral-sized, just a solid workhorse in matte black that pulled clean shots and did not need to impress anyone. The walls I left as bare brick. I hung 3 things. Corinne's recipe book, open to the house blend page, framed behind glass on the wall to the left of the register. A photograph of the original Marsh and Bean on Hawthorne, taken the morning we opened in 1987. Corinne standing in the doorway with flour on her apron and a smile that could have powered the entire block. And Elise's crayon drawing. The one with the Christmas tree and the coffee cup on top instead of a star, pinned to a small corkboard near the door where every customer would see it on their way in. I did not hang the brass sign. Not yet. I had a new one, made by a metalworker in Astoria. Brushed steel, simple font, no flourishes. It read, Corinnes, nothing else. No established date, no tagline, no legacy, or tradition or family printed beneath the name, just the name of a woman who had loved coffee and loved me, and had hidden a key inside a photo album so that one day, When everything fell apart, I would have a place to begin again. I hung the sign on an October morning, with Joy holding the ladder and Elise sitting on the sidewalk drawing the moment in crayon. The steel caught the coastal light and held it. I stepped back and looked at it from across the street, the way a stranger would see it for the first time, and I thought it looked like exactly what it was. A small shop in a small town, run by a man who had lost almost everything and was trying to learn what remained. The shop opened on the first Monday of November. No grand opening, no banner, no champagne, no speeches. I unlocked the front door at 6 in the morning, turned on the espresso machine, ground the first batch of Colombian Supremo, and waited. The first customer arrived at 6:22. An older woman in a rain jacket who ordered a drip coffee and sat by the window reading a paperback. She did not say much. She did not need to. She sat and drank and watched the fog move across Hemlock Street, and when she left she said, "Good coffee. I will come back." I thanked her and washed her cup by hand and placed it upside down on the drying rack, and I stood behind the counter and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. The particular satisfaction of giving a stranger a reason to sit down and stay. By December, the shop had regulars. A retired teacher named Walt who came every morning at 7 and ordered a double espresso and talked about his grandchildren. A young couple who worked remotely from the corner table and shared a pot of drip coffee that lasted them until noon. A fisherman named Dale who smelled like salt and diesel and drank his coffee black and called me boss, even though I asked him not to. They came, and they sat, and they stayed, and the shop filled with the low hum of conversation and the sound of the espresso machine and the smell of Corinne's recipe made exactly the way she had written it, Colombian 60%, Ethiopian Sidamo 30%, Saigon cinnamon, vanilla bean, water, at 203 degrees. On Christmas morning I opened the shop early. 6 o'clock. The fog was thick and the air smelled like pine and ocean and cold sand. Joy and Elise arrived at 7. Elise wore a red coat and carried a new box of crayons, 64 colors. And she sat at the table nearest the counter and began drawing immediately. Joy stood beside me behind the counter, tying on an apron, the same green apron I had ordered as a replica of the one Corinne wore at Marsh and Bean. She did not comment on it. She tied the strings and started steaming milk, and that was enough. I made 3 cups that morning. A chamomile tea for Elise, because she was 6, and coffee was not yet part of her story. A latte for Joy. With a rosetta, I poured slowly, watching the pattern form the way Corinne used to watch hers, adjusting the angle of the pitcher by fractions until each curve sat inside the next like a set of nested parentheses, and a plain drip coffee for myself. Colombian and Ethiopian and cinnamon and vanilla and water at the right temperature. Corinne's recipe, made by my hands. In a shop that carried her name, I picked up the cup. The steam rose in a thin line. The smell hit me, and I waited for the nausea, for the shaking, for the body memory of poison disguised as love. It did not come. The coffee smelled like coffee. It smelled like morning and warmth, and the particular mercy of a second chance you did not earn, but were given anyway by someone who loved you enough to plan for the worst while hoping for the best. I drank. The heat moved through my chest and settled in the place behind my ribs where the numbness had lived for months. The same place Joy's chamomile had first reached on that Saturday night in the kitchen in Eugene. But this was different. This was not a substitute. This was the original. The thing itself. Coffee made from a recipe written by a woman whose handwriting leaned to the right because her words were always in a hurry to reach the margin. Elise held up her drawing. A small shop with a steel sign. A man behind the counter. A woman in a green apron. And above the shop, in crayon letters that leaned slightly to the right, one word, Corinnes. I pinned it to the corkboard next to the Christmas tree drawing. 2 pictures by the same artist. One made in fear, during the worst chapter of my life. One made in peace. At the beginning of whatever chapter comes next, the door opened. A man I had never seen walked in, shaking rain off his jacket. He looked at the menu. He looked at the counter. He looked at me. "What do you recommend?" I smiled. "The first real one in a year. The house blend. It is my wife's recipe." He sat down. I ground the beans. The machine hummed. Outside, the fog lifted off Cannon Beach, and Haystack Rock appeared against the pale December sky like a promise that the coast would still be there tomorrow. I poured the cup and set it in front of him. "Welcome to Corinne's," I said. "Stay as long as you like."